Good morning. Thank you very much for such a lovely welcome. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. My 5-year-old nephew is obsessed with the Great Fire of London. He will happily spend many hours regaling us all with stories of people burying their cheese and is a source of wide-eyed wonderment at how a tiny little spark in a bakery in Pudding Lane could lead to the near total destruction of the City of London. We have climbed the monument many times. But what he might be missing in his telling of this story is that it also played a key role in the creation of the UK as a global financial hub, and it ushered in a period of sustained economic growth. As damaging as it was, the fire brought opportunities and new ideas. I was amazed to learn, and I probably shouldn't have been, that it led to the birth of the insurance property sector in the UK. So in 1680, Nicholas Barban set up the first fire insurance company in London. It was called the Insurance Office for Houses, and by 1690, 1 in 10 houses in London was insured. And of course, we all know that from that emerged Edward Lloyd's Coffee House, which eventually became Lloyd's of London. I mean, in fairness to Charlie, I can see how someone burying their cheese in their back garden might be a bit more exciting than that, but nonetheless, it's important. So innovation and people coming up with new ideas is a fundamental driver of long-term economic growth, and that's what I want to talk about this morning. The challenge we've got now is not from a baker imperiling the physical safety of the city. I hope that we've learned a little bit about fire safety since those years. But now the question is, how can we together spark that sustainable growth? The investment management sector is a vital part of the UK economy, and it's going to be playing a critical role in capital formation and financing investment and innovation. At the FCA, we've got a part to play too, to make sure that regulation helps to foster that innovation and investment. We're doing that through a commitment to proportionate regulation, to rebalancing risk, and focusing on the greatest harms. But I want to start at the beginning, and the important role that economics tells us innovation plays in driving growth. The economist Paul Romer is often quoted as saying that economic growth is the creation of new ideas. But in many ways, he was really building on the work that went back more than 150 years to Bagehot and later to Schumpeter. But his groundbreaking thinking was that ideas matter. They don't run out when lots of people use them at the same time. Firms don't need to reinvent technology every time they use it. I don't need to reinvent the software every time I turn on my computer, which is, thankfully, a good point. I'm not great at inventing new technology. But that means that innovation gives us growth, because when someone comes up with a new idea, it means that everybody who uses it is then more productive. Now, that's all very well, and it's great that we have new pieces of software or new ideas that help people to insure their property against the threat of fire, but that isn't going to get us very far on its own, which is why those early economists also emphasized the important relationship between finance and economic growth. Those entrepreneurs who rebuilt London after the fire and kick-started our insurance industry needed finance to make that happen. And that's where the investment management sector has such a vital role to play in the growth of the UK economy. The Great Fire of London paved the way for the sector, and today it's a hugely important part of the UK economy, directly contributing to our economic growth. The UK is the largest centre for asset management in Europe and the second in the world. It employs a total of 124,800 people, and ours is a highly international industry. 11% of global assets are managed here. That's more than £11 billion in annual exports and nearly 7% of total UK net exports. That makes the sector one of the main contributors to total UK financial services exports. And there are opportunities for the sector to grow, whether that's domestically, through addressing the pension shortfall through ETFs, and the growth of passive investing, or internationally with more delegation of asset management activity to UK firms, or the opportunities that come from private markets. Asset managers are crucial for the financial well-being of millions and play a key role in the capital formation for the UK economy. UK asset managers manage £12.3 trillion in mainstream assets and £2 trillion in alternative assets. I do think it's worth pausing and reflecting on just how large those numbers are. So investment funds and their managers are crucial to facilitating growth. In a survey last year, businesses said that their main reason for investment was boosting productivity. But around a fifth of those businesses said they'd underinvested in previous years and that financial constraints were an important part of the reason for that. So like earlier carnations of the sector that supported the growth of industrial Britain, the investment management sector is well placed to help finance those businesses and contribute to the growth of the UK. Regulation is essential to unlocking that potential. The FCA has always been about supporting economic growth. Trusted liquid markets support growth, reducing financial crime supports growth, accessible products for consumers supports growth, and competition supports growth. In 2023, to emphasise its importance, Parliament gave us a new secondary objective to support growth and competitiveness over the medium to long term. And our new 5-year strategy has supporting growth at its heart. Our strategy sets out how we will work over the next 5 years, focusing on 4 priorities: supporting consumers, fighting crime, supporting growth, and being a smarter regulator. Supporting growth is a shared endeavour, and we will be working closely with government, with industry, and with other regulators to play our part in enabling it. Our role is not just to get out of the way of new ideas and innovation, it's to help foster them. It starts with us doing the day job effectively and efficiently, reducing our costs, correcting market failures, maintaining trust and integrity in the UK financial system. But we won't change the UK's growth prospects without also changing how we operate. And we will change in 3 ways. Firstly, we will innovate to optimise our regulation, making sure it's proportionate and effective. Second, we will rebalance risk and look at tolerance of failure. Thirdly, we'll focus on the biggest harms. In turn, this should drive efficient, effective, and trusted financial services markets where firms can compete, innovate, and take risks. And that supports change in the wider economy, both through exports of financial services, as well as supporting the non-financial parts of our economy, whether that's supporting domestic firms with capital allocation or supporting consumers to manage their investments with confidence. I want to take a moment just to show you how we're putting that strategy into practice and changing how we operate to support innovation and growth in this sector. The first area I mentioned is proportionate regulation. We're doing a huge amount to innovate to make sure we're a smarter regulator with predictable, purposeful, and proportionate regulation. We're taking steps to optimise and improve our regulations to incentivise innovation, to break down barriers to entry and expansion, and to reduce unnecessary administrative burdens. Let me give you a few specific examples. Earlier in the year, you'll have received a portfolio letter that sets out a clear supervisory work plan. We think there's room to better tailor the regime to UK markets, to improve proportionality and smooth the cliff edges that growing firms are currently facing. We've recently published a call for input on how we might regulate AIFMs if the government makes its proposed changes to the framework. We're seeking to remove unnecessary rules and give firms more flex to compete with one another and to tailor the application of rules to firms based on their activities, including a bespoke regime for investment firms. We're also reviewing the advice guidance boundary across pensions and investments. We want people to be able to access the help, guidance, and advice that they need at a cost that they can afford when they need it so that they can make informed decisions. We're looking at private markets, which can be an important way for investors to diversify and for corporates to get long-term capital to finance growth. We've done supervisory work to support confident investing in private assets, and with innovative product development underway, we will continue to supervise to support the sector's transition to retail offers of private market products. Last month, we published our Pisces initiative to set up a new type of private stock market that will give investors more opportunities to buy stakes in growing companies. We've just published proposals to reduce and simplify assessment of value requirements. We're also retiring unnecessary data returns and consulting on removing unnecessary parts of our handbook. We're going to strip out unnecessary data requests, but we are going to keep asking for the information that we need. That's especially important in asset management and as private markets grow. Indeed, sharing data that allows us to monitor and anticipate risks helps to avoid more invasive regulation. So that's our first area, predictable, proportionate, and purposeful regulation. Our second area is on rebalancing risk. As we pursue our growth objective, we recognise that means bringing more risk into the system. The risk that consumers might fail, the risk that firms or markets might, that consumers might make a mistake, or the risk that firms or markets might fail or act imperfectly, and of course the risk that regulations might be too loose. So we're opening up the debate about the balance of risk and tolerance of failure. We need to explore the safety zone where we can increase risk without significant harm. We need to understand the trade-offs as we decide how much risk ought to be brought in, and we need to do so in a deliberate way so that the risks we take don't come at the expense of trust. Our capital markets reforms already reflect that approach to rebalancing risk. Last year, we set out a package of reforms to help strengthen the UK's capital markets. They included the most significant changes to our listings regime in 40 years. Our aim with that is to support investors to make their own decisions on risk and where to invest, allowing them to take on more risks while ensuring that systems, markets, and information can be trusted. We're actively working with government and industry and other regulators to support and encourage innovation, including fund tokenization. So our second area is rebalancing risk. Our third area is prioritization. We're reforming our supervisory model, focusing our engagement on areas where harm is greatest. We have a smaller number of priorities and will less intensively supervise firms that are demonstrably doing the right thing. We're becoming more efficient and transparent in how we communicate risks and opportunities. We're getting rid of old guidance, and we're retiring 90% of the CEO letters on our website that predate our new strategy. We're replacing our portfolio letters with a smaller number of market reports. So we're helping to foster growth and innovation by focusing on proportionate regulation, rebalancing risk, and prioritization. We're supporting the asset management sector to play its vitally important part in the growth of the UK economy. To end, there are still many questions about growth that us economists don't yet know the answers to. So let me finish by just sharing some of the things that we're exploring and thinking about right now. We know the role that financial services and regulation can play in supporting growth, but what there's no universal agreement on is which of the levers that we can pull might have the biggest impact. So should we focus on consumer protections, or should we be focusing on reducing the regulatory burden on industry? Should we do both? Is there a balance of risk? How do we think about the trade-offs between those? So last week, we published the work by the winners of our research competition on the links between financial services regulation and growth. And we're doing more work to explore that, working in partnership with others to move towards practical, actionable recommendations. So next time I'm climbing the monument, I'll tell my nephew Charlie how the Great Fire of London brought great opportunities and ideas, as well as damage and destruction. Economic growth comes from people creating ideas and innovating, but it takes investment and well-functioning, efficient markets to bring those ideas to life and make them a reality for our UK economy. At the FCA, we're focused on playing our part in enabling that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kate. Do stay with me. I've got a question come through for the audience, and it really does link into what you've just been outlining there. So will the FCA ensure that both policy and supervision of that policy supports the IA ambition for a broader, more helpful discussion?
So, I hope I've set out how we at the FCA in our new strategy will be doing exactly that, making sure that we are supporting the industry to fulfill the potential and to support the wider economy, as well as the sector itself. I mentioned some of the important ways in which the sector contributes to the economy, but the sector itself is a large part of our economy, and we need to think about that as well.
And specifically as well about risk. I think there's a lot of interest in that balancing of risk and how you're going to go about doing that.
So I outlined some of the ways that we're thinking about it. In our research that we published last week, I highly recommend it. Do take a look. There's some good stuff in there. There was a couple of really interesting papers that I think we'll use to help inform how we think about tolerance of failure. So one of them looked at risk and how risk might propagate through the system. So using some really quite innovative data science techniques, how can you understand how risk emerges within a financial system as complex as ours? So that's an example of an area where our research is helping us to inform where that kind of balance of risk might best lie.
Was that the competition that you funded last year? Yeah.
It was, yes.
And how will AI play into that in the future? Is that part of your strategy?
It certainly is. So we are a data-led regulator, and we are looking at how we can use AI ourselves as a regulator to be efficient and effective. So as part of our Smarter Regulator theme within the strategy, we are thinking about not just how we operate ourselves internally, but thinking about whether we can use synthetic data to help us, for example, look at spotting market abuse or financial crime. So there's lots of ways in which those kinds of technologies allow us to unlock more efficient ways of working as a regulator.
And also, the government has pledged to cut the cost of regulation by 25% across the course of this Parliament. What are you doing at the FCA to try and help achieve those objectives?
Well, the first thing to note on that is, as I understand it at least, that's about the administrative cost of regulation, which means the impact that we have as a regulator on the firms that we regulate. So, and part of that, of course, is the work that we're already doing around smarter regulators. So it's about more efficient, more streamlined regulation that will contribute towards the government's target. Now, I'm sure we'll find out more about kind of the details of that in due course, but for now, what we're doing is making sure that, for example, the data requests that we ask for are proportionate. We've got rid of 3 of our data returns and retired those. We've launched My FCA, which is a single point of entry for firms, just to help smooth the way that firms engage with us and to help reduce the burden that we might be imposing. So we're doing all sorts of things. We're looking at how we can digitise and simplify our authorisations process and make sure that everything we're doing is effective, efficient and proportionate.
And obviously there is a lot of talk about loosening regulation, cutting red tape. You and also Patrick also talked about how important it is to have that stability, to have the real support of international investors as well into the UK. Is there a risk that if we get a greater tolerance of failure, which will lead to less positive outcomes, that actually that could risk sparking unintended consequences and have an impact on the UK's reputation for stability?
I think the important point to note is that regulation is important for good outcomes for consumers, but also for industry as well. Good, predictable, proportionate regulation is of benefit to the industry. In my speech, I was talking a little bit about some of the ways in which we're thinking about how risk might manifest and where we might be kind of looking for safety zones where we can introduce more risk. Of course, in doing that, we've got to be deliberate and thoughtful and be very conscious of the risk of unintended consequences. So when I talked about the research we were looking at earlier, that is trying to understand kind of how can risk build up in a system that might then lead to unintended consequences. So how can we be thoughtful and knowledgeable and deliberate as a regulator in how we bring risk into the system is really critical.
Absolutely. And to what extent are retail investors at the heart of your strategy going forward? Because they're absolutely crucial in so many ways. I mean, you look at the cash deposits that's been mentioned already, the Hargreaves Lansdown Savings and Resilience Barometer, which we did in partnership with Oxford Economics. It's a huge body of research, and it shows that 6.4 million households have actually enough emergency cash savings, but they've got an awful lot of cash deposits, but they have no investments. What can you do to try and pull those levers a bit more?
So one of our 4 themes is helping consumers, and helping consumers to be resilient through their financial lives is really critical. We're all aware of the pension shortfall and the saving situation. So we're thinking really carefully about what we can do. So one of the areas we're working on at the moment that I just mentioned is the advice guidance boundary. So how can we help provide advice to consumers so they can take some of those well-informed decisions and take the risk that's needed in order to ensure that they get good outcomes through their whole financial lives?
To what extent could this be a real game changer, nudging those really cautious savers into what they consider to be really risky investments? Because the problem is there is this risk reward, isn't there? And there's this real misunderstanding about how you need to take risk.
I think we sometimes forget that in not taking risk or in keeping in cash, you are also taking a risk. And I think that needs to become part of the conversation that we're trying to open up, the debate that we're having in the country.
Okay, thank you. Let me just check and see if we've got any more questions coming through for you, Kate. No, we haven't for now. I'm sure you're holding your powder dry, and I'm sure you can collocate later on. So, Kate Collier, thank you so much for all of that. Your presentation was fantastic and should be available for questions, I'm sure. Thank you, Kate.